Ron Rivera is no longer Carolina's head coach. Will it change how the Panthers use Christian McCaffrey? We'll answer that question and much more on the Week 14 edition of the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid presented by DraftKings. We're going to start off by talking to John Lee about the Vegas lines this week. John, I don't see a 50-point game here. It looks like Vegas thinks this is a low-scoring week.
I think it's a low-scoring week. We don't have a single team. This might be the first time all season that we've not had a single team surpassing 28 points, which is my loose guideline for 3 stars on the Vegas value chart. We do have a couple teams that are pretty close, though. The Minnesota Vikings, they host the Detroit Lions without a quarterback. Well, kind of without a quarterback, and they're slated just at 27.8 points, so just a notch below. That could be good news for whoever's in the backfield as 12.5-point favorites. We'll talk about how to handle that situation with some questions around Dalvin Cook. Speaking of backfields with questions, Green Bay, who's the lead running back there? We should talk about that because they've got a 12-point home favorite against Dwayne Haskins and the Washington Redskins, and a high team total of 27 points, which is the second highest on the board. And after that, it really gets really close to one another. The one game that is really interesting this week is the New England Patriots hosting Pat Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. And after that, guys, it's slim pickings in terms of just everybody grouped in the middle. I mean, this actually might be my favorite week of the season. It's still early. I haven't done all my analysis, and it's not all baked in yet. But I really love the way that the pricing on DraftKings is being done this week. There aren't a lot of injuries, as we'll talk about. This is a great week to play GPPs, and we're going to give you some insight over the next hour about how to attack those GPPs and get an edge over the field.
Yeah, and if you guys are watching the video version, you might notice that Ryan Hester looks really different this week. That's because we've got Phil Alexander joining us while Ryan is off on assignment. We're going to come to Phil in a second for some quarterback insights. Devin, I want to hear what you think about quarterbacks this week, and then we're going to get Phil's take right after that.
Play Lamar Jackson. At 7,400, it's not a bad price. Especially on DraftKings. So I look at this week, and we do spend a lot of time on the passing matchups this week. And for the first time this season, Baltimore and Kansas City both are what we've deemed as bad matchups. That's from a passing standpoint, where Jackson gets most of his volume is on the ground, and the rushing matchup is actually pretty manageable against the Bills this week. So I'm starting with Jackson. I think that he's the cash game play this week. I'm sort of off Mahomes. I think that they have some weird things going on that they can't find a second receiver outside of Tyreek Hill. Sammy Watkins had 0 last week. McCole Hardman is basically non-existent since Hill came back. They've had some issues since over the last 2 games. It's the first time in Mahomes' career that he hasn't thrown for over 250 yards, and he's actually been under 200 in each of the last 2 games. Facing New England, I'm probably off Mahomes this week. I'll save some guys, but that's how I'm approaching cash this week.
Nice. Phil, thanks for being on the show. First off, we really appreciate you joining us. What do you think of Devin's cash game takes there, and do you have a GPP guy you like?
Yeah, so Devin definitely has the right cash game take. I will preface that with saying that I am not a cash game player. I haven't played a cash game in about 3 years, so take my cash game advice with a grain of salt. And pretty much anything that you hear out of my mouth tonight is going to be GPP oriented. But in terms of Lamar Jackson, yeah, I mean, the guy, the last time that he didn't score 26 points on DraftKings was week 5. And that's a benchmark that he only failed to clear twice this season. So in terms of a floor, yeah, he comes with it. So Devin had that. I'm going to give you 2 guys. And again, these are for tournaments. The first one that popped to me was Kirk Cousins. Cousins is expensive, and I think that's going to get the crowd off of him in tournaments. He was 3% on Steve Buzzard's initial ownership projections, and it makes sense. We actually just saw this go down in Week 11 with Cousins. They were 10-point home favorites against Denver. Nobody was on him. He was 1% owned in the Millie Maker. Everybody thought that it was the game where you're going to target the Minnesota backfield, and Cousins came out and went for 319 and 3 scores. So anytime that I see that where there's a big home favorite, especially this time, he's going up against a soft defense where Denver wasn't necessarily a soft defense, and he still crushed it. I could see Cousins, again, going for 303. He could get Adam Thielen back this week. Stephon Diggs crushed the matchup last time that they played. And, so he's my guy for tournaments. And then Devin was off Patrick Mahomes in cash games, which I agree with. But I'll be looking at him in GPPs. The over-under, like John said, is up at 48.5. It's one of the higher ones on the slate. The last 2 times that these teams got together, despite the fact that it looked like it was going to be, a defensive matchup in New England's favor, the scores were 40-43 and 37-31. So there could definitely be fireworks in that game. And if the crowd isn't on Mahomes and he's not the top price quarterback on the slate, that's the time to play him in tournaments.
Nice. And you want to keep an eye on that Adam Thielen injury status. I don't know if it's I don't know if he is going to play this week. He's trending towards maybe not, but I don't think that means you can't play Kirk Cousins here. Like you said, Diggs had a big game last time. John, who are you playing at quarterback?
I think for cash games, it is interesting. I'll be I'll admit that I have Lamar Jackson on my list of 2 cash game quarterbacks. So I'm not going to disagree with Devin, but I'm not as confident as he is. I just really think Tre'Davious White changes the outlook of how they approach this game. Hollywood Brown is the number 1 receiver, or the 1A, with Mark Andrews. And really what happens with Tre'Davious White chasing Hollywood Brown around is that he's got 1 receiver, and that's Mark Andrews. And that really is, beyond that, there's not a whole lot there for him to pass to. And if we
don't you think that helps him, though?
I'm not well, I mean,
like we saw last week against the 49ers where he threw for 100 yards and he just basically tuck it and ran because no one was open.
You're right, and that's kind of where I'm headed. He threw 23 times last week for 100 yards and a touchdown. If he doesn't get that touchdown, and ifs and buts, and we know how that goes.
And coconuts.
Don't forget the coconuts, John.
And last week was the first time in well over a month that he actually surpassed the 100-yard bonus on DraftKings for rushing, and that's really what got him over the edge. He had a rushing touchdown, So I'm saying what I'm saying is he barely got there. I feel like we have to make up excuses for Lamar Jackson.
We've said that, and
to
I've been
justify
in the camp.
him. Yeah, and Devin's done it too. We talk ourselves out of it because it's the stats are so weird and it's kind of ugly. But what if he didn't do this or that? But then the next week he does something weird and still gets some stats.
Again, he's on my list, so I'm not poo-pooing the pick as much as I'm saying he's not my favorite. He's my second favorite.
Yeah, who is your guy?
I think Deshaun Watson's a play this week against Denver. He's 6,500. And if you just look at what Watson's done over the past, call it since week 5, what is that? The last 2 months. Last week he had 3 touchdowns. The week prior to that, he was 2 yards shy of 300 yards. He had a pair of touchdowns against a zone defense in Indianapolis. The only bad week he had was against the aforementioned Ravens, who just shut that team down. I think they had 1 touchdown that week. And then just going back, 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns. The guy does score. And if we look at their implied team total, it's 4th highest on the board at 25.5 points. I don't love the running back situation in Houston. The guy gets yardage on the ground, and he comes at $1,000 discount to Jackson. I just feel like there's less questions and I can save money, which this week we're going to talk about. There's not a lot of value. And I think for GPPs, that sets up really well to some of the points that Phil was making earlier. But for cash games, you got to find the value where you can. And I think that Watson's the better value for cash.
And I saw Phil hold up the yellow black-eyed Joe, liking the pick of Watson here.
Can I just
now,
hold up my shirt?
notice that Phil's black-eyed Joes are also handmade. However, they don't look like a child drew them, even though a child did draw them.
Oh, Lord.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, this is my 9-year-old daughter.
That is pretty impressive. That's drawn, not printed, people.
So
Okay.
the
Is that
issue
for
that
real?
I,
Yeah, for real.
That's really good.
Yeah, she's solid.
So, Devin, what do you want to say here?
yeah, the issue I have with Watson is just that over the last 3 weeks, and I know it's only 3 weeks, that he hasn't ran the ball nearly as much as he did earlier this year. So he ran for 3 for 12 yards, 3 for 10 yards, and 4 for -1. I get where you're coming from, that he should be in an okay spot this week. I just wonder if I prefer the floor of getting the rushing yards from Jackson a little bit more.
Devin, you said you might have another GPP play or another guy you wanted to mention.
Yeah,
Who-
I have a couple. So I really like this Jets-Dolphins game, which is kind of dangerous. I think the guy that I like is Ryan Fitzpatrick. I just don't trust Sam Darnold nearly as much as I should. The Dolphins have no running game. I think that they're just going to abandon it, and the Jets have the best run defense in football. So there's no way that the Dolphins are actually going to be able to run the ball against this defense. It's going to be Fitzpatrick throwing the ball early and often for a majority of this game.
So it sounds like Phil maybe doesn't believe in the Fitz magic. Instead, he might be looking for the bounce back week from Darnold. What do you think, Phil?
Aren't you a Jets fan?
I am a Jets fan, but that is not coloring the analysis here. I mean, you can't really even be a fan of the Jets, like really. You know what I mean? But yeah, that's the laundry that I wear on Sundays. Here's what I would say about Darnold, and that's that over the last 3 weeks, right, we've seen Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, and Carson Wentz throw for the hat trick, 3 touchdowns. Darnold has upside. He's shown it. A handful of 20-point games there the last few weeks. They went on the road. They laid an egg. It was ugly. The Jets are going to do that, though. But I think now coming home against a really, really rotten defense, also one that, this is kind of a revenge game for the Jets, right? Because weren't they Miami's first win of the season? I'm sure that was embarrassing.
It should be.
Yeah, it should be. It's Gase's old team. I don't know. I think they're going to come in with some motivation. I think Miami could be flat coming off of an improbable win. And I just see the game script tilting towards the Jets. I think Darnold could have a big game along with his pass catchers.
Yeah, as a Dolphins fan, 3 wins for this team is more than I thought they would get this year. So they've already
You
overperformed.
believe in Fitzmagic.
And you do. All right, let's move on to running backs unless someone else has one more quarterback they want to mention.
This
yes.
could be the week that Aaron Rodgers just throws for 5 touchdowns.
I thought last week was his big week.
John mentioned him, but it wasn't. He only tells you when he gets things right.
He threw for 4. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry I messed that up.
Yeah. Do better.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Redskins have been an interesting team. They don't have a good pass defense, but teams don't have to throw against them just because how bad the Redskins offense is. And game script has been an issue. But we've seen Rodgers where some games he just doesn't stop. He just keeps going. And like the Raiders game earlier this year where they were just blowing them out and he kept throwing the ball for 4 or 5 touchdowns and 400 plus yards. So I think that he's going to go a little under-owned because he's at up to 6,800 on DraftKings where Mahomes is 7,000 and Jackson 74. But he's coming off, really, he hasn't been that good all year, but I think it could be in a sneaky spot this week.
Nice. Please leave us your comments down below in the YouTube comments there. We like hearing your thoughts on our picks. We want to hear your picks and let us know which of ours you like and don't like. All right, let's move on to running backs. Phil, I'm going to pass this to you first. There's a few guys we have our eyes on injury-wise. It seems like Dalvin Cook is going to be good to go this week. He came out early in last week's game. It also looks like Marlon Mack is going to be back after missing 2 games. And then the Chiefs running back situation is kind of a big mess. I don't know if that matters going up against New England, but it's there. Keep an eye on it. What do you think, Phil? Any of these injury situations open up value for you, or you got some other guys in mind?
Yeah, so I think that, or at least coming into the week before it became a little bit clearer that Dalvin Cook is probably going to play, I really thought that was the key to the slate, because if we were able to unlock Alexander Mattison at 4,500, that's kind of where things would have started to fall into place. With Cook now, I'm skeptical. I mean, he couldn't finish a game that they needed him in last week. This week they've got a cupcake matchup. If they're really looking to preserve him for down the stretch, I don't see why they even chance it. So as much as I'd love to play him against Detroit, I'm leery. And if the majority of the crowd is feeling the same way, maybe it opens up a spot in GPPs where you take a few risks. But in terms of the chalk, I think it's Christian McCaffrey again going up against Atlanta. DraftKings did us a small favor, knocked his price down $200. You talked a little bit in the open about the new coaching staff there, and some of the other guys could definitely share their thoughts on that. My thought is that not a lot changes. He's the engine of the offense. I think that the interim regime is going to want to win some games. North Turner is still there in some sort of capacity. And wouldn't you know it, his son is now the offensive coordinator. I wonder where he learned from. So I think that McCaffrey is going to be just fine against a middle-of-the-road rush defense, and we could count on him for 25 to 30 touches. And I see him getting to around 30 DraftKings points again. And then I'll give you one for GPPs, and that's Sony Michel. I don't think that the crowd is going to be on him.
No kidding.
Yeah, I almost just waved the red.
I threw up in my mouth.
Yeah, I almost waved the red black-eyed Joe on myself as I was saying it. But
you don't think it's James White?
So theoretically, yeah, James White.
It could be both, by the way.
Yeah, James White is in a good spot too. I think that the game script last week had a lot to do with his big game. Belichick is famous for game planning from week to week based on the opponent and their weaknesses. And I think if we're following logic, his plan is going to be, I need to keep Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce off the field. How do I do it? I attack their 30th ranked rush defense.
Yeah, their run defense sucks.
DVOA. There's been one running back this season who carried the ball at least 15 times against the Chiefs that didn't break 100 yards rushing on the ground.
Will Michel break 40 yards on 15 carries?
I think this is the week he could do it. And, if he's sub 5% in that game environment against that defense, I am willing to roll him out at, 3 or 4 times the field.
He's definitely going to be under 5%. John, what do you think about running backs?
Somebody look it up while I'm talking, but let's talk about the price differential in FanDuel versus DraftKings for him, because he's in my world, he's definitely a better FanDuel play than he is DraftKings. But so for cash games, I think Alvin Kamara is in play against San Francisco. He's just the type of guy that he's game script proof, matchup proof, and he's only $7,000. I mean, he's legitimately a $9,000 running back, and I think he's priced down for the matchup. I'm happy to take a chance with him to
DraftKings only, right?
For DraftKings, yeah, for sure. Well, yeah. I mean, this
he doesn't score touchdowns is the problem.
Well, he hasn't scored touchdowns, but it doesn't mean that he can't. We've seen in years past he's a guy that he scores plenty of touchdowns, and in fact, he's got in terms of that team, he's got more red zone touches than any person on the team. It hasn't gone in his direction, which makes him.
He only has 2 carries inside the 5.
I'm sorry.
I'm just saying if they get down to the 5, they're putting Murray in, which is the concern. I like him on DraftKings, but
he's got 27 red zone touches versus Latavius Murray's 26.
But he has 2 inside the 5.
And how many does Latavius Murray have inside the 5? 7. Okay, not enough. I don't think the end's high enough there to really make me too concerned. If it's a Murray set of downs and they get 2 or 3 at the same one, I think that really skews it in that direction. The play I really like in cash games is Devontae Freeman against Carolina. Carolina's done nothing to defend the run this season. If you look at all the metrics, normalized strength of schedule, points allowed, so on and so forth, Carolina has been dreadful on the ground. And last week against who was it? New Orleans. In his first game back, Devontae Freeman touched the ball 21 times. He didn't do much with it, but that's a much better defense. If he gets the ball 21 times for just a shade over $5,000 against that kind of loose defensive front, I'm happy to take him at 5,400. Again, on a week where there's not a whole lot of value to be had. If I can pick one GPP running back before handing it off, it almost pains me to say it, but I'm going to go with Melvin Gordon this week. 22 touches last week. When they're in the game, he's getting the ball. And this week he goes up against Jacksonville. I was looking at some normalized strength of schedule results. Over the past 5 games, Jacksonville is 3rd worst in the NFL, 30% more points to that position than league-adjusted opponents. And I think over the course of the year, they're 4th worst in the NFL. So they haven't done anything to stop the run all year. And I think the general consensus on MG3 right now is that he's not a good running back, and he's still getting the volume. And I think that this is a week where he could legitimately break out at very low ownership. I don't know where he's at. I'm trying to look that up, but I think it's fairly low at 11%, which is not that's low enough for me to take a chance.
People call him MG3. I hadn't heard that. MG3. All right.
I'll take it one step further. He's in my cash game lineup as of right now.
Yep.
I think that what he is doing is going so far under the radar that I mean, the matchup is tremendous, which you mentioned. It's the Jaguars are one of the, if not the worst second half teams. I mean, they gave up 160 yards to Carlos Hyde. They allowed 2 100-yard rushers to the Colts and Marlon Mack and Jonathan Williams, and gave up 160 and 2 touchdowns to Derrick Henry. So 3 of the last 4 games, they played Tampa last week and still allowed 2 touchdowns to Peyton Barber. But they're really struggling. So Gordon, to me, is squarely in cash game play this week.
So, John, you were asking earlier about Sony Michel and his pricing. According to the evaluator tool that we have over at footballguys.com that uses Moral Tremblay's formulas, and I present onto a page, Fantasy Draft is actually the ideal place to play Sony Michel this week based on projected receptions, which isn't a lot for Michel, I would imagine. It's pretty even between FanDuel and DraftKings, according to our tool. But, take that for what it's worth. Devin, I want to hear about your running back picks.
I mentioned cash, Melvin Gordon, 6,400 and 7,300 on FanDuel. The other guy I really like this week is Nick Chubb. So 7,900 on FanDuel and 8,000 on DraftKings going up against the Bengals at home. We've seen Chubb. He just continues to get 18 to 20 carries per game. He's hit a little bit of a rough patch over the last 2 out of those last 3 games, but I think that the Bengals have one of the worst run defenses in the league. They've allowed the most rushing yards per game at 157.6 and allow 4.8 yards per carry. So they're out. If you can handle Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins and get to that second level, you can have a big game against this team. So I'm going away from Christian McCaffrey this week in cash. It's dangerous, but I especially on FanDuel at 11,000, I think that there are a number of good running backs this week. Melvin Gordon, Nick Chubb. I do like the Kamara pick. I think that San Francisco's defense is not nearly as good as what people think against the run. They're a tremendous pass defense, but against the run, they are not even I wouldn't even say they're a good matchup. They're actually pretty poor. They're 25th per game in yards per attempt at 4.7 yards per carry. So another guy I like is Jamal Williams, and we talked about it a little bit this early on in the show, but the Packers are back to I would say close to a 50-50 split, and Jamal Williams is getting more of the reception yardage. He doesn't have the upside that Aaron Jones has. He's going to get 4 to 5 yards per carry and not really have the opportunity to break out for that 50 or 60-yard run. But I think he's at, what's his price, 4,800?
Yes.
4,800 on DraftKings. I think he has 4 to 6 catch upside. And the Packers seem to be limiting Aaron Jones a little bit. He's struggled in 2 of his last 3 games. I think that Williams is a tremendous way to save some salary this week. And then the last guy I like, and this is really maybe the first time I've liked him all year in GPPs, is Le'Veon Bell. I think that Le'Veon Bell's been terrible this year. I don't think that there's really any debate on that, but so has the Dolphins' run defense. So the Dolphins, we've talked about them seemingly every week, and I think I don't have it in front of me, but they've allowed 74 yards or more to running backs in 5 of the last 6 games, and Bell had 121 yards in their first meeting with 8 receptions. I should add you. So I think that there's upside there, particularly on DraftKings where you get that full point PPR. I love this game. I think that it's going to be the highest scoring game of the week.
It's going to be a mess. There's opportunity there. Phil, any other running backs you want to talk about, and how do you feel about that Le'Veon Bell call as the resident Jets fan?
I was a little concerned about Bell a couple of weeks ago when he was losing a ton of work to Bilal Powell, and his snap share was kind of hanging in the mid 50s, but he was back up there last week against Cincinnati. I think he's safe. I think I agree with everything that Devin said there. Just have a couple of really quick things to add. Jamal Williams, I saw right before we went on air, he was a late add to the injury report with a knee. So something to keep an eye on there. Anytime there's a midweek add to the injury report with a new injury, it's not a good thing. In which case, if anything is wrong with him, Aaron Jones is completely set up to smash in that matchup. And I absolutely agree with Melvin Gordon. And I thought it was interesting that Devin compared him to Nick Chubb, because what stood out to me was that those two guys have precisely the same baseline projection this week. And one of them is $1,600 cheaper on DraftKings. And that's Gordon, which I think highlights what a value he is on a week where there isn't a ton. And speaking of value, do you guys think that Patrick Laird is going to get up there in ownership this week?
No. I'm glad you brought him up, because he's on my list, but I figured I was going to get chastised, so I was going to let somebody else do it.
I wasn't afraid to go out there with Sonny Michel, so I'll bring him up. 60% of the snaps last week, he's catching passes.
Yeah.
Kalen Ballage has mercifully been put out of his misery. I don't know.
Don't play Patrick Laird.
What do we do with this guy? He's 4K. There's
nothing.
On DraftKings, I think he's legitimate because of the pass catching ability. I think, what did he have last week? 4 or 6 passes or receptions?
4 receptions for 43 yards.
Right there, he only needs 40 yards rushing, and he reaches cash game value.
He's not getting 43 yards rushing.
What are they going to do?
He's not a running back. He's a little scat back that, he's not a guy who's going to run the ball. And against the Jets, he's going to have no success. He had 10 carries for 5 yards last week.
Plus,
Against
didn't
the
you hear
Eagles.
Devin say earlier, it's Fitzmagic week, John? Get with the
He
picture.
did say that. He also said that the Jets have the best rush defense. I was listening.
They're allowing
unfortunately.
2.9 yards per carry. They're just dominant.
So how do you not stack Fitzpatrick with Laird? That's what I just heard you say.
Because Devontae Parker's going to go for 150 yards.
Yeah, it might be Devontae Parker week.
I mean,
Yeah.
What's his upside? And I don't want to spend too much time on Patrick.
No, we
Laird,
don't.
But
Five catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown gets you 4x value, and that's not a lot.
That's about
I'd rather play James White at 55.
agree.
White's going to be a much more popular play.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I get it.
Yeah.
One
All right.
more guy. Why is Mark Ingram 5,900 on DraftKings?
That's because he doesn't catch passes. He's the Sony Michel for Baltimore, but I think it's a decent play because if you're going to beat Buffalo, you run the ball against them, and it's kind of the argument I was making against rostering Lamar Jackson earlier. I don't hate it. I think that it's a legitimate play, but the answer to your question is he doesn't catch passes.
And then Darius Geis is cheap against Green Bay at 4,900.
Noted.
He looked good last week.
He looked good last week. There was that 1 week. All right,
How
let's
many
talk
passes?
about receivers.
Yeah, we got to go.
Yep. Please subscribe, hit the little bell, give us a thumbs up. Let's talk about receivers. We're keeping an eye on Julio Jones here, who missed last week's game. Sounds like he's going to be back this week, along with Austin Hooper probably returning. So it sounds like Matt Ryan's going to get 2 of his top pass catchers back this week. John, let's come to you first about wide receivers. Who do you like?
Not a lot. Not a lot for cash games. I'll start with cash. I think I'll end with the question that I have. I think Christian Kirk's in play against Pittsburgh at 5,200. He's turning out to be the wide receiver 1 there on a team that is running a lot of plays. They've been doing that all season. So him at 5,200, I think he's definitely in play. DJ Moore at 7,000 is in play. He's a guy that comes out, I think, at the top of our projections in terms of points per dollar. The question is whether or not you can fit him in. I did build a cash game lineup, and I could fit him in with some of the plays I've been talking about this evening. And then Julian Edelman is a bit lower on our IBCs in terms of value, but I just think that there's not a whole lot to love there outside of James White and Julian Edelman in the passing game in New England. If we're talking about a game that's going to score 50 points, I'm going to go to the guy that Brady likes to throw to at 7,100. And these are all cash game plays. The one cash game play that I'm interested to hear what the other guys think is can we go back to the what's the expression? Go back to the well. Can we go back to the well with Michael Thomas this week? 8,300 against shadow coverage from Richard Sherman. It feels like a tough thing to pay a premium for at a position that volume's not guaranteed the way it is at running back. Yet I think on Buzzard's projections, he's got him fairly high, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the top owned receiver at DraftKings 16%, and then over at FanDuel 15%, second highest.
He's a hard pass for me.
And Phil said he didn't play cash games, so maybe it's not fair to ask you that question. But I feel like it's a tough spot to put him in on a week where there's not a lot of value, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about.
I think that's the key, is that we're not finding a whole lot of value. There's not a ton of injuries that are like opening up value. We record Thursday night. Maybe something changes over the next couple of days, but I think right now Thomas is tough to squeeze in there. I mean, Phil, do you have a take on that?
I think Thomas is a fine play. He came in a little bit higher on Buzzard's projections than I would have initially guessed. So I don't know. I guess there's a chance that other people are feeling the same way, and he might come down a little bit. In which case, I mean, you never have to twist my arm to play Michael Thomas. And I think that those are 2 good defenses, but they're also 2 pretty good offenses. And it's in the Dome, correct? That one's in New Orleans.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's on the fast track. I mean, there's a non-zero chance it shoots out. In which case, you look at Thomas's ownership. If it ends up about 10%, is there greater than a 10% chance that it shoots out? I'd say sure.
Yeah.
So I think he's fine for tournaments, but to John's point, I think there's better cash game plays out there.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. Devin, who you got at receiver?
Jarvis Landry is my favorite guy this week. He is firmly the Browns' number one receiver. I do like Beckham too for a GPP play, but what Landry's done is really kind of different than what he's done throughout his career. He's becoming more of a red zone guy. He has 5 touchdowns in his last 5 games, and has gone. I mean, he's seeing the volume as well as being the only red zone threat that the Browns have in the passing game. Beckham just, for whatever reason, can't get open in the red zone, and when he is, Baker Mayfield doesn't see him. So you're kind of relying on a long touchdown from Beckham, which it's always possible. But Landry is more of a cash game play for me this week. On DraftKings, I like Curtis Samuel a lot at 4,900. I continue to be impressed by just watching him play. He seems to be a guy that Kyle Allen is going to, particularly in the red zone, he has 5 touchdowns on the year. He's been a little inconsistent the last couple of weeks, but one of those games is against the Saints, which we know the Saints have a pretty difficult defense to go against, and he has 4 touchdowns in his last 7 games. So at 4,900, he's a pretty cheap receiver that I think you could get away with if you're looking to save some salary. And then a GPP play that I think that a lot of people aren't going to be on is, and I doubt many people will be on actually, is Kenny Galladay at 6,700. David Blau is a baller. I mean, the guy goes in against the Bears and lights the Bears on fire for about 2.5 quarters. Let's not talk about the last 20 minutes of that game, but I mean, the guy stood in there against some of the best teams in college football as well last year. He put up 59 against Ohio State, put up over 300 yards against Wisconsin, which were 2 of the best defenses in college football. So he's not afraid of just chucking the ball, and the Lions are going to see what they have in this guy. Galladay had 159 yards last week, and I do think that he's a better passer than Jeff Driscoll. So he's a guy that I'm looking at. And then FanDuel specific, they've actually done a much better job. So props to whoever at FanDuel is listening to my rants the past few weeks. I do think that DJ Chark at 6,200 is interesting with Gardner Minshew back. Going up against a Chargers defense that, they're probably a neutral matchup, a neutral to tough, but at 6,200, it's tough on FanDuel this week because they finally priced up DJ Moore to over 7,000. They priced up Cortland Sutton to over 7,000, and they priced Devontae Parker, the 3 guys we've been rambling about for weeks, all over 7,000. So it's a much tougher job, a much tougher slate than it has been the past couple of weeks.
Phil, who do you like at receiver this week?
Receiver on the chalky side, I don't mind going back to Devante Adams. That big total in for the Packers, they should absolutely crush Washington. And anytime Aaron Rodgers is at home and he's got a big total like that, I'm definitely interested. And Adams, since he came back from the toe injury, he's collecting 32% of that team's targets. That's second in the league over that span, behind only DeAndre Hopkins, and 9 out of 15 red zone targets in that sample have gone his way as well. So I think he's set up for a multi-touchdown game. Maybe this is the week that the yards come along with it. And then I'll give you one for GPPs. And
is Adams a GPP only guy? The only concern I have is Quentin Dunbar has been one of, if not the best corners in football this year.
Yeah. I think I would probably say yes, only because the price came up $1,000 from last week. So that's kind of it. It's kind of that same Michael Thomas thing where if you look at points per dollar, you could probably do better somewhere else. But
Allen Lazard is sneaky in that game.
For sure. I would say stacking the Green Bay offense is definitely a strategy worth considering. A couple other guys that I've got my eye on. I really like Will Fuller, provided his hamstring checks out. I know that he's been limited in practice this week, but you've got DeAndre Hopkins probably going to be shadowed by Chris Harris. That should give Fuller the overflow targets. and we've seen what he could do if he's commanding significant targets in any game. And again, the game environment is there for the Texans as well. They're near double-digit favorites, and I could see them really rolling over Drew Lock now that there's some tape on him. And then one more really quick. So Devin loves the Jets game, the Jets-Miami, to be the highest scoring on the slate. I'm going to give you one that might even be a worse call than that. I think that Tennessee at Oakland has shootout potential.
That's worse than that for sure.
Well, bear with me. So the total there is 47.5, which is, it's definitely higher than the Jets in Miami. We've seen Tannehill put up big numbers. Oakland is kind of due for a bounce back, going back home. The Tennessee defense has been falling apart at pretty much all levels, especially in the secondary. And if you look back on what big athletic wide receiver ones have been doing against them, even Zach Pascal last week, if you want to count him, he's got some size and athleticism. He went for over 100 yards. You had Tyreek Hill before that with a monster game. You had Mike Evans before that with a monster game. You had DJ Moore before that. Ever since who's their cornerback that's no longer there, used to be on the Patriots?
Gilmore or I had it too. Sorry.
Malcolm Butler.
Yes.
Right. So when Malcolm Butler went out, their secondary kind of fell apart. So I don't mind Tyrell Williams. That's a long way of saying that.
Gotcha. Hey, John, any other wide receivers before we move on?
I'll give you one deep GPP flyer. I like to do these from time to time. I think everybody's going to be on Zach Pascal after last week, and I can understand why. But let's not forget, he's not the only person on that offense, and everybody's going to say, well, who else do you like there? Oh, it's a tight end named Jack Doyle. I'll go a little bit deeper. Marcus Johnson had 6 targets last week. And maybe that's not a lot, but against Tampa Bay secondary, that can be all that you need. He's 3,600. He's going to be one of these guys that's like 2 to 3% owned, and certainly has 5 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown upside. So I have other guys on my list, but I'll save them maybe for the end.
Devin, I want to talk about tight ends. I think you have a unique take on tight ends this week. We've got Austin Hooper coming back. We've probably got Greg Olsen not. Yeah, get your red black-eyed Joes ready. We've got Greg Olsen probably not playing in this game. Devin, who do you like at tight end this week?
Well, let's start with the obvious one. In cash games, it's Ian Thomas. With no Greg Olsen at 20, he's the minimum price on both sites. I think you just plug him in. You could play 2 tight ends this week, but I think you have to play Ian Thomas if Olsen is in fact out, just because of we've been talking about value and how it is pretty difficult this week to find it. The dark horse GPP flyer of the year. And that is
wait, even more than Ricky Seals-Jones?
Yeah, Ricky Seals-Jones was in a better spot. This one I'm not nearly as confident in as Jones. Jones, I was ready to pound the table. Seals-Jones, I was ready to pound the table on. The guy is Jeremy Sprinkle. And the reason I say that is if you go back and you look at Green Bay over the last 6 weeks and what they've actually allowed against tight ends, it is borderline atrocious. So I'll just ramble this off real quick, but 172 yards and 3 touchdowns to Oakland, 63 yards and a touchdown to Kansas City, 84 yards to the Chargers, 98 yards to Carolina, 129 yards and a touchdown to San Francisco, and then 70 yards to Caden Smith, who's like the 7th string tight end on the Giants. Jeremy Sprinkle's not a great player. I think we all know that. But if we believe that the Packers are going to blow out the Redskins, how are they going to move the ball? And they're going to have to try to throw it, which Dwayne Haskins is awful, but I'm talking myself out of this play.
Yeah, this is bad.
But
can we just? I'm going to stop you.
Blake Martinez couldn't cover any of us on here, so I do think that he has 50 yards and a touchdown upside this week.
The last 6 players, you talked about how bad Green Bay has been, and you're right, they have been bad against defending tight ends, but they've been going against teams, including Caden Smith. Caden Smith, there was nobody else to throw to last week, so they had to throw to
Is there
Caden
anyone
Smith.
else to throw to in Washington?
Yeah.
No, they're not. No.
Chris Thompson?
But before that, it was George Kittle, Greg Olsen, Hunter Henry, Travis Kelce, Darren Waller. I mean, that's a who's who of gauntlet. I'm not going there. I just cannot imagine. I'm going to say fairly confidently that Justin Sprinkle will not even be in my player pool.
Would you say, John, that
Jeremy, you knew I was going to do it.
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah.
You're saying you're not even going to sprinkle some exposure into your lineups this week?
This is the truth, yes.
Okay.
I can't do it.
All right. I can't either. Phil.
He scores a touchdown this week.
If Haskins could hit the broad side of a barn with his throws, I might be in. But like, I've been playing Terry McLaurin the last couple of weeks, and let me tell you how painful it is when this guy has like yards of separation between him and the next closest DB, and Haskins just airmails it.
He's just gonna check it down to Sprinkle.
I don't know if you can do that. I mean, it's painful to watch. The one thing I will say in your defense, though, Sprinkle last week. Kelvin Harmon is the only Washington player who ran more pass routes. So if they are in a negative script, I'm not defending this play.
Don't talk yourself into Sprinkle, Phil. Don't talk yourself into Sprinkle. All right, we spent too much time on Sprinkle.
115 players in my player pool this weekend. It's approximately what I'm going to have, and not one of them is going to have the last name of Sprinkle.
Good luck.
Perfect. All right, let's move on to other tight ends. Phil, who do you like at tight end?
Let me see here. So Ian Thomas, absolutely. Devin nailed that one. I mean, we saw what and I don't think that he's going to do what Tyler Higbee did last week at the minimum. I don't think he has the same touchdown potential that Higbee did, but you know, we saw how valuable it could be when someone is at the bare minimum, $2,500. And could exceed their salary-based expectations. And Thomas is definitely in that spot. He's explosive. He was a top 6 tight end over the final 5 weeks last year as a rookie. So really all he needs is an opportunity, and I think he gets it. And, you know, he's good chalk, I think. Aside from him, I'm going to go back to Darren Waller. Waller had a good game last week. He got back in our good graces after a couple of down weeks. He was back up to 9 targets. And I think that's the key is because that's a little bit more predictable now with Hunter Renfrow out. You're seeing a lot more of those short area targets over the middle going back to Waller. And, you know, he's one of the top tight ends in the league. Tennessee, kind of sneaky bad against tight ends. Anytime that they faced a good one, you had Austin Hooper put a $130 on him. Hunter Henry, 97 yards. Kelce, 75 and a touchdown. Doyle, 73 and a touchdown last week. So I'm definitely into Waller, and I also like a Hunter Henry bounce back game. I think that last week was just kind of like an anomaly. Denver plays a zone and they limited his targets, and that's not going to be the case against Jacksonville. He's going to get back to his usual 7 to 9 looks. High touchdown upside with his red zone ability. And I think I like spending up if I'm not going with Thomas.
John, who do you like at tight end this week?
They priced them really well, so I don't like a lot, which is a good thing. Again, it goes back to that GPP strategy I was talking about. I'll make it a unanimous call on Ian Thomas. I think it makes a lot of sense. I really don't think we're going to see Greg Olsen. And at a position that's highly volatile and priced well this week, that's where I want to go for cash. But I do think if you had the salary to spare, Travis Kelce's affordably priced at $6,200 against New England. I just think that he's too athletic for Belichick to scheme him out, especially when I think that if you're going to scheme anybody out, it's got to be Tyreek Hill. He's just the wild card there, and he's going to beat you a lot more than a guy like Travis Kelce, which is hard for me to say, but it probably is the truth.
Would you play him and Thomas?
Can you play him and Thomas? Let me see who's in my lineup.
So at 6,200 at the receiver position, you're looking at Cortland Sutton, Odell Beckham, DJ Chark, John Brown, James Washington. I think Kelsey's played than all of those guys.
I would agree with you. Yes, I would agree with you. I'm not typically one who plays two tight ends on any lineup, but at least in the context of the question you asked, I would agree.
Real quick, the only thing that I would add there is that in at least one of those games, I forget if it was the playoff game or the regular season game last year, Belichick put Gilmore on Kelce, and Tyreek Hill had an absolute field day. So we'll see if he learned his lesson. I anticipate that he did.
Well, it depends if Jason McCourty plays. If Jason McCourty's their fastest corner, so if he plays, he missed last week. I think he missed the game before. If he doesn't play, they're going to have to put Gilmore on Hill. They won't have a choice. But they may put McCourty on Hill if he does play. So it's something to watch.
Yeah, definitely watch. Twitter is the place to find all that information out. Nobody mentioned Jack Doyle, so at least I didn't hear it. We should talk about him. Tampa Bay hasn't been good defending anything, and there's not a whole lot of receivers. I think I mentioned that in the wide receiver position. We went through the Colts. You got to consider Doyle at 4,600 for both cash and GPP, especially coming off a week where I think he had something like 11 targets, and I'll stop there.
He's another guy that I think you could play in cash with Thomas. I think it could, in cash on DraftKings, it could be a 2 tight end week.
And that may be the way to save salary, right? Because you've got some low-priced tight ends where you can save some salary.
What I typically do is I compare the $4,600 Jack Doyle to a $4,600 flex guy that I may have left. And I say, okay, compare him to Sammy Watkins, Mike Williams, John Ross. Like, these aren't good players.
Yeah.
Just one layer above that. For a wide receiver, I completely agree. But if for a running back, I would be more than happy to go running back because the volume there is more guaranteed, so to speak. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you're checking her at the running back position too.
Yeah.
You're saying if you're playing a cash game, you would better have the running back in your flex spot in that situation?
I would,
for sure.
Because you're getting the guaranteed volume, or at least the implied guaranteed volume.
But if you get down to 46, you're looking at
Patrick
Mostert.
Laird.
No. Doyle's a better play than Laird in cash.
All right, let's move on to defense. Let's go through defenses kind of quickly so we can spend a little more time on stacks. Phil, I'm going to come to you first. Who do you like at defense, and is it site specific?
So the one that I'm looking at, and it's not really site specific because they're priced up on both sites, but I like the Vikings against David Blau. Is that how you say that, Blau?
Yeah, Blau.
Okay. Yeah, so he looked good on Thanksgiving, compared to what everybody expected of him. But I don't like the spot at the Vikings, even though they are kind of a pass funnel. I think that they have some tape on him now. He completed 58% of his passes. He took some chances, and he got away with a few things against the Bears, a couple of balls that could have been picked.
He's a baller.
Yeah, that's all well and good. I don't see it going too well for him. I like the big favorites, the Vikings, the Packers, the Texans, and possibly even the Saints at home on the contrarian side.
I really like looking down my list of DFS picks and going, who of these guys are ballers? They're going to be in my lineup. John, who are you playing at defense?
I'll pretty much hand it over to Devin because I had 4 defenses written down, and Phil just named 3 of them. I'll add in the Ravens against Buffalo.
Ravens are the cash play.
That's the other one I have. But other than that, Phil and I were in lockstep, to use his term.
Yeah, you save some money by playing the Ravens, right, Devin?
Yeah, the Ravens in cash on DraftKings and the Falcons in cash on FanDuel at 3,500.
All right. Huh. Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, you got to save cash somewhere, right? So it sounds like defense and tight end might be those spots. Let's talk about stacks. We usually get some interesting insights. We got two big GPP players here. John, I'm going to come to you first because I know you had some wild ones ready, I think.
Yeah, I got Cole Beasley.
Oh, my gosh.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I just wanted to bring him up.
That Thanksgiving by Cole Beasley.
Yeah. I called, I might have called that.
John can't go one show. We all name about 40 guys each on this show, and John always picks out the one that he gets right and reminds you about it.
It's good. It's good PR. It's good PR.
Yeah, it's called Narrative Street.
Yeah.
Guys that I'm looking at or stacks I'm looking at, I think there may be no better quarterback, running back, wide receiver combination in football. And I'd have to think about this a bit more. But then Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas. And, they've got one of the higher team totals on the board. They could go under-owned against San Francisco, and they're playing at home, and you're going to get about 60 to 70% of the offense by going with those guys. I think you can do a team stack with them and feel pretty good about it. Other guys, I think you can go with Mahomes, Kelsey, and even Sammy Watkins. Sammy Watkins, nobody's going to be on him this week because he's put together two very bad weeks. And as we've been talking about, Belichick's going to be worried about Hill and Kelsey. He's not going to be worried about Sammy Watkins. And I suspect this is a bounce-back week for him. I talked about a few other guys. I'll close out by saying Sam Darnold to Jamison Crowder, who I think could bounce back with a nice week. He's been seeing a lot of volume, but hasn't really accrued those fantasy points. And this is a week where I suspect we'll see some positive scoring regression for where he's concerned.
With Devontae Parker.
Sure, run it back with Devontae Parker. I'm fine with that.
Like it. Phil, who are you playing in your stacks this week?
So I opened up with Kirk Cousins, and I would say Cousins stacked with Diggs and then run back with Galladay is a tournament stack with a lot of upside and a little bit of ownership. I think that the Minnesota defense could still come through even if Galladay has a big game. So that's one. And then the other one, I'm stacking up that Raiders Titans game. So, you could do Carr and Tyrell Williams for 20% of the cap. Throw Waller in there. That's where pretty much all of Carr's targets are going to go is those two guys. And then run it back with A.J. Brown, who is now a full-time player. He's, over 90% of the snaps in the last couple of games. He's explosive. Oakland's defensive backfield has been a mess for years, and he should be able to dominate Trayvon Mullen on the perimeter. And that'll allow you the ability to do whatever you want with the rest of your lineup. So I don't mind making that a core stack in a handful of lineups.
The good news about that game is it's a 4:00 game, so you could get nice and sauced before you before it starts. You don't really even have to watch it.
I'll be very curious to see how these games play out, the Tennessee-Oakland game and the Dolphins-Jets game. Devin, who you stacking?
Yeah, the other game I like this week is the Colts and the Buccaneers. I think that Jacoby Brissett, Zach Pascal, and then one of Chris Godwin or Mike Evans, and we say it every week. I'm a Godwin fan. I think he has bigger upside that he's shown this year. And when he's on, he's really good. So I think Brissett to Pascal to Godwin is a nice, intriguing stack.
I think Evans is going to be higher owned, so I think going to Godwin here after recency bias could be the right call.
I feel like people just wait. Whoever had the bigger game last is the guy that people own. So it's like it just goes back and forth. And then the last one that I like, it's not great, but we're going to go with Matt Ryan and Calvin Ridley.
All right. Yeah, even though Matt Ryan's getting back both Julio and Hooper probably this week.
Well, if Julio plays, I do like Julio. So I think that it's a game. Is he going to play?
I think he's going to go this week.
Okay. So then it's call it Julio, Matt Ryan, and run it back with Curtis Samuel for some savings.
And obviously, keep an eye on Julio Jones' situation. We record on Thursday nights. It could change. But Ryan wasn't here, and Devin brought up Julio Jones. I think Ryan's going to like that.
And Aaron Rodgers to Alan Lazard. I think Devante Adams will be somewhat popular, and he draws Quentin Dunbar, where Lazard draws Fabian Moreau, who is terrible.
Let's go to parting thoughts. John, give us your words of wisdom on this week 14.
Well, my words of wisdom this week are play GPPs for all the reasons we've spoken about throughout the show. Tight salaries, even distribution of ownership. This is a week where you can really have a lot of edge. I oftentimes like to plug my article, but this week, maybe in honor of our guest, maybe drop down one article on the DraftKings side and see this guy. I don't know if he's to my left or to my right. It's always different the way I'm looking at it. But GPP domination is just beneath tips and picks. So give that a read. It's one of the better features on the site for those of you who play on DraftKings. He knows what he's doing, and give it a look.
Yeah,
I'll say it's the best article in the industry. Sorry, John.
Bold. I love it. Yeah, Phil writes a really great article. Be sure to check it out over at footballguys.com. Devin, parting thoughts.
Not much. I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving, and we only have 3 weeks left, which is kind of two more shows, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, we got a week 15 and a week 16 show, and then we take off the holidays for week 17. Mr. Alexander, thank you for filling in for us this week.
There.
What are your parting thoughts?
Thank you everyone for the kind words about the article. I do put the work in. I hope that people are reading it, and there's been some bad that you've got to take along with the good, but such is life in tournaments. But hopefully you had a few good weeks on me, and thank you guys for having me on. It was a pleasure to have a front row seat for the Jeremy Sprinkle takes and the
Justin
Sprinkle mispronunciations. I mean, it was a fully immersive Power Grid experience. Totally glad to be on. Great chatting with you guys.
Thanks for joining us, man. We appreciate your insights. And just to be clear, there'll be no sprinkling in any of John's lineups, no Justin's or Jeremy's or anybody this week. Yeah, no sprinkling. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com. We'll be back next Friday morning with our week 15 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Phil Alexander, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.